Welcome back to another episode of Pictish Shorts with the Pictish Arts Society. I have the great pleasure today of interviewing David McGovern, whom you'll have seen on screens for some time. David has been part of the Pictish Arts Society for 25 years, and he's been on the committee for all of those years. He's currently vice president. After a career in tech, David became a stone-carver, which he's been doing for 15 years. And you can look into his amazing work by visiting Monikie Rock Art. David continues to fill our feeds with amazing monuments and carvings and really gets those of us in academia to think in different ways about the things that we study. So I have the great pleasure today of being with David. So David, welcome. I feel like you don't need a welcome to your own show. Let's begin with the very first question that's always asked, which is what first got you interested in the Picts?
Well, do you know what? It was a book, and it was this book, which is The Ancient Monuments of Tayside by Herbert Coutts. And this was published in 1970. But when I was a young guy, going into Dundee, I always used to go into the McManus and have a look at this book and jot down coordinates and things to go and visit stuff. Because in here are all the burial cairns and Pictish stones and hill forts and things that you could find around Tayside. And I just started going to visit them. I used to get the bus to places like Aberlemno and go and stand and wonder at these things, But this was the portal for me into that world because I didn't really have anything else. And also there was a guy, Robbie the Pict, was cutting about at the time, a constitutional campaigner guy. And he used to put posters up in places like Groucho's record shop, which had great graphics and would have the words of, so-called words of Calcicus, beyond us lies nothing but sea and rock and all that kind of stuff. There was a kind of mysterious thing being propagated about the Picts and the Picts in popular culture. But this to me, thank you, Herbert Coutts, because this was the thing. And I love little books like this. It's got a sort of Ministry of Works feel to it. It's got that sort of typeface, which is just absolutely gorgeous and clear and all the rest of it. And the summary of each of the monuments is incredibly clear. So this to me is one of my favourite books of all time. And this was my portal into the world of all things Pictish.
Is that copy heavily annotated?
It is. It is.
I bet.
Yeah. Well,
it has a biography itself.
It is. It's got a hand list at the back and a little map. So, of course, you can make your own notes.
Right. Is there a particular site that early on really captured your imagination?
Well, anything that I could walk to. So, from where I grew up in Broughty Ferry, it would be sites like Cairngregg, which we'll come to later, I think.
Well, to kind of turn to our second question, what, David, do you find most fascinating about the Picts now, having lived with them for some time and knowing their art intimately in terms of carving it?
Well, Ali Heather on the last episode said something very cool. He said that, to begin with, it was all about the mystery, the mysterious Picts. And Adrian Maldonado said something very cool on here as well. He said that the Picts are having a bit of a moment, to say the least. So recent findings, recent scholarship, recent archaeology has obviously brought out a lot more information, particularly about everyday life, normal life, and things like the art in particular. So what Ali said was he prefers these Picts. I do too. As someone who was seduced by the sort of mystery of it all, it matured into a much broader interest. But thanks to recent work by people like Gordon Noble, we just understand so much more. Going from Herbert Coutts to, this fabulous book. The thing that gets me is all those little molds, the molds of the little animals. I mean, the sheer artistry and invention in making these things, whatever they were for, it's just expanded our understanding, particularly of the artistic output of the early medieval period in Scotland. And then, obviously, Victoria Whitworth's work on kells, where we can now entertain the prospect that this crazy book, could have been created from the artistic output that was going on at Port Mahomack. So that's what fascinates me about the Picts now. It's filling in the gaps and it all comes back to the art for me. It always does.
It does. In what way has your own art influenced how you approach the Picts?
Obviously, I started carving because I wanted to understand how they did it. I wanted to understand how it felt. Everything from a beautiful incised line. I mean, for example, before I'd carve any lettering, if I'm working on a headstone or a monument or whatever, before I do that, I always carve a Pictish animal. right? Because the Pictish animals are all full of sweeps and curves and those incised lines. You can peck them out with a tiny little point chisel. And it's the only way really to recreate those fine sweeping lines on things like a Pictish beastie or a Pictish wolf, so Ardros wolf. The only way to get those lines. And when you're working on it, what you realize quickly is how many of those lines intersect, because you're feeling your way through it. How am I going to get to that line? Oh, it joins up with that one. And, this is why I always say to people who are studying Pictish art to try it, to try it. Come to my workshop and try it and have a go, because you'll learn so much about how it was done. And that was what it was all about for me in starting out. It was really just to see how it could be done and how it felt.
It's a bit like what you described there as an artist who draws, who says that to draw is to learn how to see, that you notice things that you don't
Yes.
otherwise. I also presume that your work also involves a lot of looking and looking again. And again, it's training in how to see, which I think I've been trying to kind of, when I'm looking at an object, draw even just little bits for that. I don't have the skills that you do with stone carving, but trying to do something that puts my kind of mind, connects it to my hand. New things always come about when you do that. We'll move to our third question. I'll insert a few off-piece questions as we go. Let's have to for you, David.
Yeah.
What is your favorite stone or artifact?
It comes down to the thing that I have recarved more times than anything else.
What's that?
And it's the Ardros wolf. And it's obviously a very enigmatic little carving, right? It's a beautiful little thing. I remember the first time I see it being so surprised at how small it is, on that piece of stone in Inverness Museum. But it's not just the fact that it's got these wonderful sweeping lines. It's also that capture of a prowling animal. Whoever carved that had seen a wolf, there's no doubt in my mind. But it's the face on that thing. It's the interplay between the eye and the mouth, that little sly smile of this thing that's on the prowl. And I can carve it 10 times and I'd be happy with 1 out of 10. It's so difficult to get it just right. And yet the original sculptor completely nailed it. It can't be bettered. It can't be drawn any better. It can't be carved any better. All we can do with that thing is imitate, because it's just so perfect. Next time you look at it, look at the eye and look at the smile. Look at the drawing. Look at Ian Scott's drawing that you hopefully be able to find on Trove. It's just a wonderful thing to behold. And I suspect he had as much difficulty capturing it with pencil and paper as I do with a stone and a hammer and a chisel. But it's just a perfect little carving. Can't be better.
Do you have a monument that you think is particularly well displayed in a museum? My
favorite display, redisplay, however you want to call it, of all time is Iona, Peter Yeoman's work. And others, of course, but the work Peter led in Iona. I think the idea of having, this period of time that you can spend in that museum, and the light will move from left to right, and the noises of the liturgical stuff, activity that was going on.
Yeah.
Bells, very close to my heart.
Yeah.
Bells, love bells. And just the sounds of it in this really sort of compressed, maybe 40 minutes or something that you can spend in the museum there. I think it was just brilliantly done and so well displayed. And what gets me about it is there's not a lot of space in there, but what they've done with that is absolutely superb. So
David,
it's probably my favorite, yeah.
It's a great choice. It has really good acoustics, does that museum, inadvertently, because I played fiddle in there twice.
Wow.
And Peter was there once. I had to get his permission. And it's actually really brilliant acoustics for playing West Highland music on the fiddle. And it felt like a real honor and joy to get to play in front of the crosses too. That's like in my top 5 moments of life. But just the museum is brilliant on so many.
Yeah, I'll have to take my bell next time.
Yes, do. I feel like the crosses need to hear it after some time, just adding to that sonic environment. Okay, our next question kind of relates to museums, but is more Pictish focused. David, if someone could only visit one site or one museum, which one would you point them to and why?
Now, I've cheated here because I'm going to first of all,
you're allowed to cheat.
I know.
More than anyone here.
I'm going to first of all suggest Glamis, right? And the reason for that is that I think there's something at Glamis that captures the ecclesiastical landscape very well. So I think that if you start at Glamis on Hunter's Hill, just outside, just across the main road, up that lovely little forest track where you can spend quiet time with the Hunter's Hill Cross, And the reason I like it so much is that that would have been the old routeway into Glamis from Dundee, so from the south. So this is essentially you approaching a place that is a Christian settlement, with the church there and St. Fergus and all the rest of it. So I think that as you're approaching it, the first thing you encounter is this Pictish cross slab, and it's telling you that you're approaching a place, an important place. And then obviously you can come into Glamis down that road, and then via the manse and the cross slab that's in the manse garden, aligned with the church, and assuming that's aligned with the site of the original Church of St. Fergus. And then down the side of the church, down to the burn and down to the St. Fergus's well, which is the site of St. Fergus's cave and all the rest of it. So I think that even as messed up as it is with, the cave no longer being there and it being, the well being there and how accurate that is, and the whole thing of it being the place where three waters meet is quite important. But I think that being able to make that journey into the place on the same sort of trackway that people would have entered into that place in the 7th century, encountering stones as you go and thinking about, maybe stones that are missing now. But then I would extend that. And the reason I'm cheating, Christina, is that I would extend that journey probably on a bicycle, right? Via places like Nevy and the church at Nevy, all the way through to Meagle and to that great royal site of Meagle and its incredible collection. So I think that being able to read that sort of bit of the ground, you can do it at ground level by making that journey. Yeah, by going from Glamis, so the very churchy site at Glamis, all the way via these little churches, through to Meagle, and visit a site of European importance in terms of early medieval art in Scotland. I think that's a fantastic little journey to make and a well-spent afternoon.
And I think a theme you've just thrown up there is that idea, too, that monuments are in conversation with their landscapes and that topography matters. And I think a lot of times we study, or even viewing things in books, we can see, the magnificence of Pictish art and upright relief cross slab in a book, but we don't get a sense of how that monument fits in with its environs, whether built or the landscape. And I think that's the real power of Pictish art, at least having for myself studied quite a bit of Northumbrian material, is the Picts know landscape like no one else, in my opinion. And monuments are in conversation. Routeways are, kind of denoted by changes in topography, and monuments speak to that too. And there's just this very much kind of symbiosis and conversation with the natural world, which I think you also see quite a bit on the west coast of Britain in a way that maybe you don't see in certain other areas. Would you agree?
I would. And I like speaking to people like Gilbert Marcus and about intervisibility of sites. Yeah. And I don't think we think enough about how places are connected to each other. You can go to Meagle and be, enthralled by this incredible collection of sculpture. But it was only when I was on a bus on a PES field trip when Norman Atkinson was leading it that he then took us off through the pass and talking about Belmont, and how important it was as a royal estate, and then up through the pass and down into Strathmartin, that you think about how important the place was and how it connects to the others. Yeah, so that's why I think more in terms of journeys these days than actual thinking about the one individual place. How is it connected? And I think that wondering about the connection between Glamis and Meagle is an entirely healthy thing to do.
I also like the element of a bike ride. Derek Craig told me of the corpus of Anglo-Saxon stone sculpture that when he was doing his PhD on Southwest Scotland, that it involved a lot of bicycling and then carrying kind of volumes sometimes with him, but the bicycling element was huge. But you can see changes, obviously, in the landscape in a way that you don't. It would just see monuments as discrete things. Lovely. That's a fantastic answer. Okay. Our last question, but it'll be followed, I think, by a few kind of questions in the middle. David, I'm very curious, which lost stone or fragment would you most like to find?
Well, this brings us back to Herbie Coots again. Yeah. And the ancient monuments of Tayside, because it's Linlathen, the stone Pictish beastie carving that was discovered 1847, something like that, when they were excavating a Bronze Age burial mound called Cairngregg on the Linlathen estate, just outside Dundee and very close to where I am now. And it's because it's lost that it's so fascinating, because this thing was in the garden in the 1950s. We've got a photograph of it.
So not long ago.
No, it was last seen sometime before 1958. We know by 1958 it had disappeared. The house had been abandoned after the war. The house, the Linlathen house itself, the family had moved away. I have heard it suggested that they took it with them to Fife but there doesn't seem to be any trace of that. It may just be a bit of educated guesswork. But, it wasn't a huge stone. It was kind of losable. It was a couple of feet high, maybe a foot and a bit wide, so a bit portable. Seems to have been its problem, but it's completely gone. And I used to use this book to go up to Cairngregg and just sit and wonder, because there were other things found. It was a weird sight. There was a bronze riveted dagger, a beaker that was found there, and then on top of the capstone and a layer of clay seemed to be this fragment of a Pictish stone. So obviously some kind of later use in Pictish times. The site's still there. If you go there today, it's worth a walk up to it. It's a lovely little place. There's a little carving of a Pictish beastie based on the Linlathen Stone that I did and put there. It's been reported to me twice as a new find. It does have my initials on the back. Yeah, I put a mark on the back to show that it's not ancient. But I just wanted it to kind of go home, this carving of the Pictish Arts Society logo is partly based on this. It's part Strathmartin, I think, and part Linlathen. So I think it's emblematic of losses in the Pictish canon, and I think it's entirely right that it should have contributed to the Pictish Arts Society's logo. But I'd just love it to turn up one day anyway. I've had a right good look for it. They built houses in the old walled garden a couple of years ago, and I was hopeful it would turn up then.
Well, that would have been a good chance.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So
were you out there every day?
In terms of spending teenage years trying to find it and wondering how on earth a thing like that could be lost in the modern age, I would definitely go with the Pictish beastie of Linlathen, or Cairngregg, whichever you want to call it.
And follow-on question, if I may, what's on your mind to carve next that you haven't carved, something Pictish? What is something you've always wanted to attempt but haven't yet?
Oh, there's a question. Goodness me. I've got books and iPads
I'm
full
sure
of sketches and drawings and things that I would love to completely recreate. If I was going to recreate anything or get funding to recreate something, it would be the St. Orleans Cross, simply because it's falling to bits. And it's one of these stones that it really needs urgent help to save it. It's our only Pictish stone with a boat on it. It's kind of beautiful. We're losing a lot of detail. It's deteriorated significantly in my lifetime, so I remember it looking better than it does now. It sits under a shelter of sorts, and it really makes you wonder what in the care of historic environment Scotland actually means, because we are just letting it fall to pieces. There's problems with access, I know, but it's not with our capabilities to save it. It's time for it to come inside now. Much though I love the idea of stones being in their original positions, they are precarious at times, as we've seen with Aberlemno 3. Which we probably shouldn't speak too much about, but the St. Orleans Stone, I think, is in the same sort of category of in the care of, but not being cared for, and is simply disintegrating before our eyes. And we're going to lose that stone. So I would like it to come indoors, and I would like to replace it with a replica. And I think that would be a very fitting thing to do. I
was going to say, it also highlights the importance of your work, making replicas, preserving monuments, the record that your work is as well.
Yeah, and it's a bit like Skinnet, how you would approach it. It's got all the elements that keep me awake at night and excite me, and that is that you've got the stuff that we can see. So my first stop would be John Borland or Ian Scott's drawings, right? So there's what we know and we can recreate, and then there's what I might be able to see from old photos and things that others might not see. Like things like the hippocamps and stuff on Skinnet. And then there's the stuff that's completely lost, and thinking deeply about what conceivably could be there. That's an important element, I think, when we reimagine a monument, accepting that there are losses and trying to think, it's not making a statement, this is what was there, this is what conceivably could have been there based on stones in the locality, stones with a similar composition, stones that seem to have similar scenes, like hunting scenes and things, and speculating from there as to what it could be. So it would have a bit of everything as a project. It wouldn't be straightforward at all, but it would be well worth doing. I love it. Skinnet, the great strength of Skinnet is that it's fairly close to original purpose, in that it's part of a pilgrimage trail, right? And it's out in the landscape and you can see it as you approach it. But also you can go to the museum and see the original stone, see it in the state that it's in. It's been in 8 pieces and things. And you can also have a look at the drawings that have been done over the years. And then you can go and see a representation in the landscape, in stone, of what it could conceivably have looked like the day it was carved. So yeah, it would be an incredibly exciting thing to do.
David, do you ever think that you'll run out of things to carve?
Do you know, I did wonder that when I started, when it became my job rather than just fun. I did wonder about that. And the answer is no. And there's two reasons for that. One is because I've also got West Highland late medieval art to go and dive into. And the other thing is because of the sheer level of invention in Pictish art. I look at, you never see two crescent and V-rods exactly the same. There seems to, and this suggests to me, in just my way of thinking about things, that the sculptor had an awful lot of leeway in terms of how things were designed. I think that you've maybe got the role of a patron or the church, dictating what the scheme of the thing, overall, message of the thing has to be. And then when it comes to particularly symbols and animals, I think that there's such a level of invention. The sheer variation in what is quite a simple thing like a crescent or V-rod, over geography and time, suggests to me that they were allowed to do it. So in answer to the question, who do you think was designing individual symbols and things? I think it's the sculptor.
And would you say this differs in some ways from sculptures in other bits of Britain during the early Middle Ages?
I don't see that invention. There's two things that always struck me about comparing Pictish art. I mean, I'm not an art historian, right? But, when I compare things like Pictish art to Irish art or Anglo-Saxon art, there's the very fact that the symbols survive into that, Christian period, if you like. I know that I'm talking in very sort of broad terms, but, when you look at Irish art, it's almost all biblical. It's all the biblical message and the high crosses and things. Wonderful though they are, I just don't see that same level of invention down to, obviously there's repetition of the symbols, but the design within them varies so much over geography and time that it just keeps me endlessly interested. But that to me is the big selling point of Pictish art. It's the level of invention and the love of novelty. I had this conversation with John Borland about whether templates were being used. There was a suggestion that maybe leather templates and stuff. How? I mean, anyone can draw a crescent and V-rod, right? You don't need a template for that. But the level of invention within the interior decoration of the thing is always the thing that's of massive interest and changes. There are very few stones. I mean, there's maybe a Kirriemuir, maybe Kingoldrum. There's a couple of stones that look like they were maybe churned out because somebody wanted a copy of that one. Show me two Pictish stones that are the same, Just doesn't happen. Even at these wee ones that may be grave markers or whatever, they're not the same.
Thinking of dice. Yes, yeah. Or even just the very format of the upright relief cross slab, the variety of the forms that it takes is so diverse. Or even just the Picts being able to produce high crosses like the best of the Northumbrians, but they very clearly are choosing when to do it, when to not. I mean, just this sculptural exuberance and sophistication. I can see that as just someone who views these things, but hearing you say it is all the more meaningful as a sculptor. So I guess the answer to will you ever get tired is no.
And the other thing is the very, very fact that they stick with the cross slab, giving them more area to carve. That's an artistic imperative. That's an impulse to create more and more imagery on the thing, not just stick a stark freestanding cross up, but to keep those areas and fill them with all this wonderful stuff.
Focus on the minute detail. I mean, the Picts do detail like no one.
Yeah, and I think that I keep thinking about Victoria Whitworth's book, and just this idea of if it didn't come from here, from where? Because there isn't that background of slightly mad invention, Iona or Northumbria. Don't see it. Because it's mad. It's not even a real book, is it? You'd never read the Book of Kells as a gospel book. And that's what really jumps out. And so grateful for Victoria for sticking her neck out, going all the way with it, because and even the book itself, her book is beautiful.
It's a thing of beauty. It is.
It's a stunning thing. But it's just really got me excited about that idea of, if not here, then where? Where do we see invention in art? Where do we see creation? To me, I'm happy with the suggestion. It's Port Mahomack, and I love it.
David, is there anything else that you would want to share? You get free reign. Is there anything else you'd like to share, either about your experience with the Pictish Arts Society over the years, a fond memory, or something Pictish?
Well, I think that the Pictish Arts Society is very close to my heart, and I think that it's been very well led in the time that I've been involved in it. First, Norman Atkinson, and then John Borland. who's done so much for Pictish studies. I mean, goodness me. We're really in debt to these guys. And then Jane's leadership. It's the Pictish Arts Society is going from strength to strength in terms of our online audience, membership, our ability to step in and help save stones, to be able to respond very quickly. I think that all areas of heritage should have a Pictish Arts Society, the fact that we
Agreed.
can, when a stone like the Conan Bridge stone is discovered in a sensitive context and money is needed immediately to lift and shift and conserve, the fact that we can step in very quickly without anyone having to fill out a 10-page grant application and just be the people who help quietly is its great strength, and it's in a great position to do that just now.
And our field trips are legendary. I was thinking
They
about when
are.
you're talking about going through the landscape on bike or bus. I know we have our upcoming one this summer, but I think that's another joy of PAS too, is a community of people, but also people journeying together and seeing these things in situ and having people, experts talk about them in a very welcoming sort of environment is unparalleled. I would say the Pictish Arts Society really offers that in a way that
I
few
think when you're
societies do.
standing around a Pictish stone in the company of PAS field trip attendees, and you've got some of the the greatest thinkers on these on these matters with you, it's just fantastic. And maybe that's something that we do with podcasts. We maybe bring people together to talk about individual artifacts and things, and just have a quick chat. That's maybe where we take Pictish Shorts next.
I like that idea, David. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to seeing your next projects to come.
Thanks, Christina. Thank you.